I never expected to inherit anything besides my father's stubbornness. But 2 months ago, a lawyer tracked me down to tell me an uncle I barely remembered had left me his rural property. He said the place was outside a small, fading town, one of those clusters of sagging farmhouses you pass on the highway without noticing. I had just quit my job and was floating between short-term rentals, so the timing felt like a cosmic joke. Still, something in me needed distance from my old life, so I drove out there, promising myself I'd just take photos for the real estate agent and be gone in a day. My uncle's land sat at the end of a dirt road that seemed to dissolve into the trees. The farmhouse leaned like it was trying to whisper something. The barn was worse, its red paint peeling in long strips like dried scabs. Even before I stepped out of my car, something felt wrong. There was a smell coming from the old sheds. Not death, something sharper, something processed. Inside the barn, dust floated in the air like drifting ash. But the surprising part wasn't the decay. It was the sections that weren't decayed. Someone had carved out a clean, carefully maintained space in the center of all the rot. A metal table gleamed under the light from a cracked skylight. The floor beneath it had been scrubbed until the concrete almost looked polished. That made no sense. The lawyer said nobody had operated the property in years. My uncle had been living in a care home for almost a decade. I tried to explain it away, but the unease grew when I found the small office attached to the east wall. Boxes were stacked in neat rows, labeled with dates in my uncle's tight handwriting, years and years of entries. At first, they seemed like simple logs, trespassers, curious kids, the usual rural complaints. But halfway through the second notebook, the tone changed. He wrote about trucks showing up at random hours, about lights in the barn long after midnight. He described people in coveralls hauling equipment inside, leaving chemical residue behind. He wrote that he heard humming machinery that shouldn't exist on a dairy farm. His notes got sharper, frantic. He described tracking tire treads, marking footprints, trying to catch license plates. Then, the final pages. They know I've been watching. Someone slipped a blank ID bracelet under my door. I think they want me gone. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, like someone was breathing down my neck. Dust stirred behind me. I turned, expecting it to be a draft from the broken window, but then I saw shadows moving outside the door. Slow, intentional. I snapped the notebook shut. My hands were shaking. The property was supposed to be abandoned, but I was not alone. I backed into the corner of the office, my pulse hammering against my throat. The shadows outside the doorway weren't accidental. They shifted with human precision. I killed the light on my phone and crouched, waiting for whoever was there to reveal themselves. But the footsteps never came inside. They stopped just outside the barn. A soft, mechanical beeping followed, like a keypad being pressed. Then a heavy door I hadn't noticed earlier slid open, metal groaning in protest. Light spilled across the dirt floor. For a few seconds, I saw everything. 2 trucks backed up to the hidden loading area. A group of people in pale work suits moved with practiced coordination, unloading containers I recognized from medical documentaries. One of them raised a handheld scanner toward the barn interior, sweeping it back and forth. They weren't there to take anything. They were checking for someone. Me. I eased back through the office window, ignoring the glass biting into my palms, and crawled along the side of the barn until I reached the tall grass. My car was parked too close. I'd have to circle wide through the tree line. Every snapped twig sounded like a shout. When I finally reached the road, I sprinted. The night swallowed me whole until I dove into my car and twisted the ignition. Gravel spat behind me as I tore away. In the rearview mirror, I saw 2 figures at the barn's edge. They weren't running. They were just watching, like they already knew everything they needed to know. I drove straight to the sheriff's office, but the deputy behind the counter looked bored before I even finished explaining. He asked if I'd been drinking, if I had a history of episodes. He said lots of abandoned properties attracted squatters or thrill-seeking teens. When I mentioned the notebooks, His face tightened, like the topic wasn't new to him. That was when I realized my uncle had gone to them too, and they hadn't helped. They'd ignored him, or worse. I didn't go home. I slept in my car behind a gas station miles away. When I woke up the next morning, a text was waiting on my phone. No message, no number, just a photo of me from the previous night, sprinting through the grass near the barn. Behind me, barely visible, was a figure watching from the tree line. Since then, the photos keep coming. Different towns, different rentals, always taken from nearby, always taken when I think I'm alone. I don't know what they're doing out there. I don't know why they used my uncle's land or why they erased every trace of their operation the moment I fled. But I know one thing, they are still out there. And they don't send warnings unless they intend to come back. I don't sleep much anymore. Every time headlights pass my window or a twig snaps outside, I feel that same cold certainty. They're watching to see if I make the same mistake my uncle did. And if I do, they won't need a second chance. I never planned on moving back to the countryside, but when my estranged uncle passed and left me his property, I didn't have much to lose. The place was tucked into a forgotten stretch of farmland, rolling fields, dirt roads, and a wooden mailbox leaning like it was exhausted. I remembered almost nothing about my uncle. He'd cut himself off from the family long before I was born. The lawyer simply said he wanted me to have it. No explanation. The farmhouse was small and weather-beaten, but the real surprise waited in the old outbuildings behind it. The barn looked half-rotted from the outside, but once I pried open the warped doors, the interior told a different story. A long corridor of reinforced beams, a steel table bolted to the floor, and a drainage trench that had been scrubbed so clean the concrete looked almost new. It was a bizarre contrast. Decay everywhere except for the parts someone had meticulously maintained. I told myself the place must have been used for storage or repairs, but my stomach tightened when I saw a locked room on the far end of the barn. My uncle's keyring had dozens of old, rusting keys, but one slid into the lock perfectly, as if used recently. Inside, the air smelled like mold and cold metal. A single desk lamp swung above stacks of notebooks, each labeled with dates going back several years. His handwriting was cramped and jittery, lines pressed into the paper like he was writing with shaking hands. The early entries looked like harmless observations, strange sounds at night, unfamiliar vehicles passing by. But halfway through the fourth notebook, his tone shifted. He wrote about unmarked trucks parked behind the barn, people unloading containers in the dark, the metallic smell leaking from the trenches. He described finding tools left behind, gloves, syringes, a coil of wire. He tried to report it, but no one took him seriously. According to the later entries, he started keeping watch at night, documenting every movement. Then, one line appeared again and again. "I think they know I've been watching." The last notebook ended abruptly, mid-sentence, and before I could process what I'd just read, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel outside. Someone else was on the property. I killed the lamp and pressed myself against the wall. Through a crack in the boards, I saw headlights sweeping across the yard. Slow, deliberate, like whoever was driving already knew exactly where to look. A van rolled to a stop beside the barn. Its engine kept running. The side door slid open. People climbed out wearing pale coveralls and face shields. They moved with the same eerie precision my uncle had described. One carried what looked like a metal case, another a coil of tubing. They headed straight toward the barn entrance. My pulse hammered in my throat. If they came inside, there'd be nowhere to hide. I slipped out the back door of the small room, easing it shut behind me. The night air was cold, heavy. I crouched behind a rusted plow and watched the figures walk into the barn, their flashlights sweeping over the walls. One of them bent down, inspecting the freshly disturbed dust near the office door. My footprint. Their heads snapped toward the darkness like they'd sensed me. I backed away slowly, every step feeling like a countdown. My car was parked too close to the barn. I couldn't risk it. Instead, I headed for the tree line. I almost made it when a sharp buzz rattled my pocket. My phone, lighting up the night like a flare. I killed the screen immediately, but it was too late. Flashlights shot toward me. Voices, low, urgent, cut through the dark. I ran. Branches slapped my arms and tore at my clothes, but I didn't dare slow down. I didn't look back until I reached the road. The van was still there, but the barn lights had gone dark, and two figures stood fully still, watching the direction I'd fled. By the time I reached the nearest town, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. I tried calling the sheriff. They said they'd look into it, but something in their tone told me not to expect much. I didn't go back to the property. I thought leaving would be the end of it, but the next morning, a message arrived from an unknown number. It was a picture of me running through the field, taken from just a few yards behind me. They followed me, just like they followed my uncle, and now they know exactly where I live. My grandparents' produce stand has always been the kind of place you trust without question. It sits right off Route 45, a little wooden shack painted barn red with white trim, built by Grandma Rose and Grandpa Bill decades ago. Everything ran on the honor system. People left money in the slot of a metal box and walked away with whatever they picked. I'd grown up stopping there in the summers, grabbing corn or tomatoes, and that trust had always been part of its charm. That Saturday in August, I drove out to help Grandpa with fence repairs, expecting the usual day of digging post holes and listening to railroad stories. Instead, Grandma met me at the kitchen door, her sunflower apron trembling as she pulled me inside. Grandpa sat at the table with a manila envelope pushed toward me. Inside were 5 photographs, all taken in their bedroom while they slept. The first from the doorway, the second at the nightstand, the third near Grandma's breathing machine, the fourth at the foot of the bed, and the last was from directly above them, as if someone had been standing there, looking down. Nothing had been stolen. The vegetables were untouched, the cash box empty, except for the envelope. Whoever had done this had known exactly when and how my grandparents slept. The windows were locked, the doors bolted. Their dog Butterscotch hadn't barked. It was impossible. The police deputy brushed it off as a prank. Local kids, probably. But I couldn't stop thinking about how someone could navigate those creaky stairs and hallway in total silence. Later, I checked the old barn behind the house. It had been built when the property was a working dairy farm, now mostly storing gardening tools and decades of junk. But on the Hoft, dust was disturbed over a wide area. Behind old feed sacks, I found a sleeping bag, empty food cans, a battery-powered lantern, and binoculars pointed directly at my grandparents' bedroom window. Under the bag was a spiral notebook filled with detailed schedules, times they woke, medications taken, when they watched TV, even the dog's walks. Margins were filled with sketches of creaky floorboards, window latches, and hidden keys. Pages got more personal as they went on. Grandma's health, Grandpa's tremors, financial details, Social Security numbers. At the bottom of one page, circled in red, "Tonight, final documentation before next phase." It was dated that very Saturday. I called Deputy Hanson again. This time, he looked concerned. While waiting for backup, Grandpa and I searched the rest of the barn. More evidence of someone living there for weeks. A camp stove hidden behind lumber, notebooks tracking customers, their purchases, even license plates. The handwriting became increasingly cramped, obsessive, documenting everyone who stopped by the stand. Whoever this was, they weren't just watching. They were planning, analyzing, and waiting. Hours later, Hanson arrived with another officer. They cataloged everything. Fingerprints all over the ladder, sleeping bag, binoculars, and notebooks. The results were chilling. The prints belonged to Claude Brenet, a man recently released from a state psychiatric facility, previously institutionalized for targeting elderly couples. He'd convinced families he was a long-lost relative, slowly taking over their lives, monitoring their routines, and slipping them drugs. My grandparents had unknowingly been under surveillance for weeks. Brenner had packed the notebooks and photographs in a backpack and fled, but police caught him at a bus station miles away, with crushed pills matching Grandma's heart medication mixed with a sedative. He didn't resist. He simply stared blankly as officers arrested him. In his pockets were photos of other elderly couples, all isolated, all running small stands or shops. It was methodical, terrifying, and precise. The produce stand never reopened. My grandparents moved in with me, shaken to their core. Grandma Rose never slept through a night again, waking at the slightest noise. Grandpa refused to take out his hearing aids, preferring the whistle of feedback over silence. The house sold to a young family who knew nothing of what happened there, and I drive past sometimes, seeing kids playing where trust once ruled. But for my grandparents, and for me, that patch of grass will always be haunted. The morning when photographs replaced honesty, someone turned our world into something darker, and nothing would ever be the same.